I was intending this to be one session, but as I started preparing the class, I realized I had enough material. I started choosing what to leave out, and I decided I don't want to leave it out. So since our classes are limited to 1 hour, this is going to be first of 2 or maybe even 3 sessions on the rise of Israel. The story that some of us know, most American Jews do not know the story of how the state of Israel came into being. Today, we live in a time where the lies of the left, of the woke left, the progressives, the squad, people claim that Israel is basically a colonialist state, that Israel was part of a colonialism like the British Empire colonialism, and that it exists to persecute dark-skinned people, namely the poor persecuted Palestinian Arabs. In reality, there's just so much to unwind in all of that. First of all, there's no such thing as Palestinians. The land of Palestine, we're going to learn it today. Palestine is the land of Israel. There are Arabs, and they were Syrian Arabs. It was part of Syria. And it's a whole long story that we'll get to long from now. So part of that is that. Next, the majority of Israel is not necessarily white-skinned. 55% of the population of Israel is Sephardic. Those are Jews from North Africa. Those are Jews that are darker skinned, Sephardim. And so you've got that second myth. But most importantly is how Israel came into being. Israel came into being not because the United Nations gave us permission. Quite the contrary. The United Nations fought Israel only in the end when there were no choices. We're going to be learning today that the United Nations played a critical role in cutting down the size of Israel. And it actually ultimately played out in part. One of the 3 Jewish underground groups decided they had had enough of the United Nations. And when the United Nations sent a peace ambassador to negotiate cutting down the size of Israel even more, Count Folke Bernadotte, the Lechi assassinated him. There's a lot we're going to be covering. People don't know about the Jewish underground and the fact that the state of Israel exists because Jews went to war and fought against a non-Jewish world, primarily of all people, not the Germans, but the British. And we're going to start, right? Just a quick note, there will be a little bit of music in the class this week and next week. The music is going to be Hatikva, and the music is going to be, at certain points, the song of the Irgun, the song of the Lechi, the song of the Haganah, or of the Pamach. So there are going to be 3 or 4 songs for those who want to know about that in advance during Sfirat HaOmer. It's being done for educational purposes and not to sit and just listen to melodies and music. There's a lot to learn. Let's start learning. And thank you again for being here. This is the first time, just let's begin in this nice way. This is the first time that Hatikva ever was played in Abu Dhabi, in an Arab country, as we start learning about the rise of Israel. It took almost 75 years, like 72 years, until an Arab country had Hatikva play. An Israeli won the international judo contest. By the way, that lady who was kind of crying, her name is Miri Regev. She's at that time, she was Israel's Minister of Sports and Culture. And she's Sephardi, talking about the Sephardic majority in Israel. This is the other one. This is the one of two times in history that Hatikva was played in the International Olympics, in the Tokyo Olympics of 2020. An Israeli won the competition for art gymnastics. And this is one of the only two times that Hatikva was played in the Olympics. Let's just get that back up there on screen share. Okay, there we go.
אנחנו עומדים על הרגליים ומתרגשים ממר יום דולגופיאד, מדליסט הזהב.
We begin our formal program now. I want to begin with the Balfour Declaration. For a brief moment in time, God has taught the Jewish people several times that when we put our faith outside of God, and we put our faith in secular and in non-Jewish sources, it always comes back to bite us. I could go through that itself is something we'll do at some point on another future series of history classes. A Jewish proclivity to believe, for example, Germany. There was a belief, 1815, when Reform Judaism was created. The belief was, now we're going to permanently bring an end to anti-Semitism. And we're going to show the world, all you have to do to stop anti-Semitism is change Judaism to be like Christianity. Why would they hate us? And what better place to prove it than Germany? And so they created Reform Judaism in 1815, Hamburg, Germany, created a temple, and they stopped praying in Hebrew, started praying in German, and they gave up a belief or an aspiration to move to Israel and to see the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the temple. They renamed their synagogues temples to show that we don't yearn for a temple in Jerusalem, we have our temple here. And Berlin is our Jerusalem, and Germany is our Palestine or our Zion. And of course, of all places in the world where anti-Semitism broke out in the worst contemporary manner, it would end up being Germany. God sends us the message one way or another when we put our faith in outside sources. And what happened after World War I is that the Allies divided up the spoils. France got some, and Britain got some. Woodrow Wilson, on behalf of the United States, said, "We fought for freedom. We did not fight for land." So America refused to take any part of the dividing of spoils after World War I. However, the Middle East was among the spoils because Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, they owned much of the Middle East, and they chose the wrong side on which to fight with the Germans. So their land was taken. And France was given Arab countries like Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, which is the reason that a lot of Moroccan Jews speak French. And on the other hand, Syria also, by the way, and on the other hand, Britain was given land that included the land of Israel, which in those days was called Palestine. More on that again later. And so Britain was given Israel and kind of hinted that Britain would personally, so to speak, see to it that the Jewish people would have their own country. They didn't say country, they implied it. They referred to a Jewish homeland. Let's take a look at the Balfour Declaration.
Rabbi?
1 second. So this is November 2nd, 1917. So we're talking about 106 years ago. He wrote it to Lord Rothschild. Why not? I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations. Zionist aspirations was for a Jewish country eventually, which has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. Here's the statement. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. And it soon became a great debate. What does that mean, a national home? Are we talking about a country? Or are we just talking about Borough Park? Or are we just talking about Flatbush? We're talking about Long Island. Are we talking about a place where Jews are going to be independent and sovereign and rebuilding in the land of Israel? Or is this going to be a British protectorate, sort of like India or something like that, which at the time was part of their empire on which the sun never set? So we will use best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. Okay. And I should be grateful if you bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation, and it's signed Lord Balfour. I'll continue in a moment, but Janet had something she wanted to say. Go ahead, Janet.
So there's like a small conflict. We always thought the Balfour Declaration was definitive, but there is some documentation around T. Lawrence's promise to the Arabs that if they switched sides and didn't fight with Turkey, their hegemonous, landlord in World War I, that they would get a homeland, and that's somewhat what they base their concerns on. So, and that slightly predates the Balfour.
And that's the idea of, that's why they refer to the perfidious Albion, because, or Albion, because there's a tremendous amount of British perfidy in the way they maintained their British Empire. They played off different places against each other in order to hold on to all of them. And they promised Arabs without Jews knowing what they were promising Jews without Arabs knowing. I want to bring to you now 10-minute or so, 6 minutes statement by Professor Mordechai Kedar. He's a professor of history at Bar Ilan University. He put this on the internet in Hebrew, and then he did it again in English. So I'm going to give you about a minute of the flavor of him speaking Hebrew, which is his first language. And then I'm going to just shift it over to the English version. And it introduces where we're going with today's class. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, many people talk about...
I was preparing it last night, and I guess to save time, I just wanted to give you a flavor of him in Hebrew, but I guess I just decided I was going to save time and stick with the English. Okay, so we'll do it that way. Let's get Lisa back in. Here we go.
The Holocaust, which was carried out by the Nazi Germans, and they are right. In addition, many people know much about the role of other nations which took part in the extermination of Jews in those days. Polish, Croats, Serbs, Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Russians, and also in the Arab world, in Libya. Libyan Arabs hunted Jews in order to put them into concentration camps. In Baghdad, in what happened in 1941, definitely others as well. So not only the Germans, but others also took part in extermination of Jews through the years of the Second World War. However, one nation succeeded to escape from this infamous list of nations which took part in the Holocaust. And this is the British Empire. What do I mean? Of course, Britons never had any role in shooting Jews or exterminating Jews, nothing of the sort. However, everybody knows that Britain put a blockade on the shores of the land of Israel as a result of the White Paper and others. And during the 40s, Jews could not escape from Europe to the land of Israel. You're right. Cuba also was closed, and the United States was closed. And the Minister of Migration in the Canadian government said about the Jews on the St. Louis ship in 1939 that none are too many. Means not even one Jew should be allowed to come down from the ship to get a refuge in Canada. So the ship, the St. Louis ship, went back to Hamburg, and the 900 Jews on board were sent to extermination later. So, but all those countries, United States, Canada, Cuba, were not committed to save Jews, unlike Great Britain, because according to the mandate on the land of Israel, on Palestine, the land of Israel, Great Britain was supposed to enable and to facilitate mass migration of Jews to this country. And this was the obligation which was put on Great Britain according to the mandate since 1923. However, Britain betrayed the Jewish people and put a blockade on the seashores of Palestine, land of Israel, during the mandate years until the end of 1948. Had the British allowed a mass migration of Jews from Europe to the land of Israel, millions of Jews would be saved. And this is something which people are not aware of. If the British Empire, who had the control over this country, allowed what it was supposed to do, to allow Jewish migration, mass migration to this country, according to the mandate, millions of Jews would be saved, would not be sent to extermination as of 1941 by the Nazis. Ladies and gentlemen, people are not aware of it. But the blockade on the seashores of the land of Israel in those years actually pushed Hitler to the final solution, because he saw that no other country except Jews, and Britain does not allow them to run away to the land of Israel. If they open the gates of this country, Israel, to the Jews in Poland, in Romania, Ukraine, Lithuania, all these Jews from Europe, they could run away. And this is actually what the Germans would agree. In the beginning, they didn't think about the final solution. This was started in 1941, 2 years into the war. Only then they started to think about the final solution. Only because they wanted Europe to be Judenrein, means clean of Jews. Because Jews, according to their ideology, were filth. But the British didn't allow the migration or the running away of Jews to the land of Israel. Did Britain apologize for this behavior which pushed the Germans to the extermination of Jews? Have we ever heard an apology from the British Empire about their behavior and their indirect responsibility for the Holocaust? Does anybody remember this role? Are people aware of the British role, passive role, or maybe active, which pushed the Germans to this final solution in Auschwitz and other extermination camps. Somehow, the British Empire sneaked out from the infamous list of nations which facilitated the Holocaust. I think that it's time that we, Jews and other normal nations in the world, will start talking about this, and maybe it's time for the British Empire to apologize for what they did in those years by pushing the Nazi Germany to exterminate millions of Jews in Europe.
So the point that Dr. Kadar was making, and I won't repeat it because he spoke, but just to highlight one or two of his points, Hitler's original plan was not mass murder. Hitler's original plan was to evacuate Jews out of Europe. As he said, he wanted Europe, Judenrein, all Jews out of Europe. Nobody would let the Jews come into other places. And so that's his point, that if America wasn't letting Jews in, and Cuba, in the case of the SS St. Louis, at least there was the land of Israel. And when the British closed off those harbors, it left Hitler, so to speak, with no alternative, so to speak. Look, we're not making any excuses for anybody like Hitler, but the idea that he suddenly had to evolve with his people, they decided, we've got to come up with a new plan, how we're going to get the Jews out of Europe. Since there's no one that's going to take them out, we've got to clean them out the other way, hence the final solution. And so it is important to know this, not for the purpose of blaming Britain, but understanding what prompted the rise of the Machteret, the Jewish underground that went to war against Britain and that engaged in activities that included bombings and shootings and hangings, and it was quite an underground. And there were three different underground armies. But first, let's amplify a little bit of what we just learned. The stories, first of all, ship number one, the Struma. The Struma set sail. That was Jews getting out of Europe. And the Struma set sail. It's during the period of December 41 through February 1942. This is a ticket to get onto the Struma. Thus, I don't know Romanian, but transport the emigrant, Ivri, it's Hebrew, in Palestina. So this is a Hebrew transport to Palestine. And you could get on the Struma, and it was going to take you. An estimated 791 refugees and 10 crew were crammed into her. It was an old ship. People did not get to go on the HMS, the gorgeous cruise ships. People had to buy their way onto small boats, ships that were meant for cattle, whatever they could buy, whatever Jewish organizations and immigrant groups could buy to get Jews on in order to get them over the seas into Eretz Yisrael, into Palestine. The Struma was an old ship that shouldn't even have been on the water. Its diesel engine failed several times between her departure from Constanta to the Black Sea in 41, 5 days after Pearl Harbor. And she arrived in Istanbul on December 15th in Turkey. I want to give you a sense of the map. Here's Turkey. You know, you've heard of Ankara, Izmir, and Istanbul. Istanbul is right on the Black Sea. Where's Israel? Well, you can actually tell. If you follow my arrow, there's Israel right over there. You could actually see the outline of Israel, right? There's going to be Egypt, and there's Syria, one of our neighbors, Iraq. This area, which today is the country called Jordan, was part of what was supposed to be Israel. Palestine, Mandate Palestine, was the land of Israel plus what today is called the country of Jordan. This line down the middle is the Jordan River. Just as the Mississippi River sort of splits America east and west. It's a little bit more on the eastern side, but people always talk about the biggest this west of the Mississippi. Let's just get a sense of the Mississippi for a moment. We'll come back up here a moment. Just so you have a sense. Okay. So here's the United States. And this red line is the Mississippi. When they talk about like, this is the biggest synagogue west of the Mississippi. This is the best restaurant west of the Mississippi. The Mississippi is unique. It kind of cuts America right down the line, north-south. And in the same way, the Jordan River cuts British mandatory Palestine right down, and then it flows into the Yam HaMelech, the Dead Sea. It starts up the Jordan River. Up here, you've got the Yam Kinneret, the Galilee Sea, the Sea of Galilee, and it divides. And what we'll learn about it as we continue, eventually the British tear out of Palestine 3/4 of the land that was supposed to be the country of Israel, and they gave it to the Arabs. They made a country called Jordan. We'll get back to that later. So what you have is the Struma is anchored in Istanbul. It no longer, the ship is the engine is pretty much dead. It's at the Black Sea, and the people are trying to get to Israel to survive Hitler. She had to be towed by a tugboat even to get out of Constantinople and to enter Istanbul. With her engine still inoperable and her refugee passengers aboard, again, 791 refugees, the Turkish government towed the ship out of Istanbul and they towed it into the Black Sea. Get out of our country. We don't want you here. The Soviet Union had a submarine, the SCH-213, and torpedoed the ship, killing 781 refugees. 781 Jews. The Black Sea's worst civilian naval disaster in World War II. Only one person ultimately survived, David Stollier. The ship wasn't going to be allowed into Palestine. The British were keeping him out. Already there started to be posters around Israel. The High Commissioner of Palestine, the British authority officer put in charge of Palestine, was Sir Harold McMichael. And posters started coming up around Israel, wanted for murder. Sir Harold McMichael, High Commissioner, wanted for the murder of 800 refugees drowned in the Black Sea on the Struma. This was part of what set off, not the only thing, but what set off the Irgun and the Lechi on their campaign. We've got to drive the British out of Palestine. This can't go on. It did go on. The SS Struma, again, this is a photograph of the Jews on that ship before it went under. And this is a contemporary monument to their memory in Israel. For those, if you have a small screen or you're on a phone and aren't watching, it's the rear half, let's say, of a ship pointing downward as it's sinking, and it says Struma. Next ship, the Patria. The Patria, November 1940. There were 3 different ships, the SS Pacific, the SS Milos, and the SS Atlantic. The British did not allow any Jews from any of those 3 ships. And, well, let's read. The Patria disaster was the sinking on November 25, 1940, by the Jewish paramilitary organization Haganah. The Haganah, one of the underground groups, set off bombs on this ship. Let's understand what that's all about. The British weren't allowing Jews in. Very often the ships were reaching Haifa. They got to the Haifa port And at that point, they would be surrounded by British Army who would take control of the ship, turn it around, and bring people to either send them back to Europe or put them in displaced persons camps, like in Cyprus or in Mauritius. The Haganah, one of the three Jewish underground groups that was involved in organizing shiploads of Jews out of Europe, they tried to get them in late at night. Perhaps the British wouldn't see them coming in. Every so often, the ships got through, coming in the middle of the night. You'll see some footage in a moment what that looked like. But what the Haganah did in the case of the Patria was they were prepared. If the British don't let us in, don't let the Jews off the ship, once we reach Haifa, we're going to blow up the ship. You're not going to be able to turn us around. And the Haganah set off a bomb on the ship. And it resulted tragically, they miscalculated in their bomb. And it led to many hundreds dying. Let's go back to this. First, let's give you a feeling of what it looked like being on one of these illegal Jewish immigrant ships. There's no sound, just about 3-4 minutes of footage I'd like to share with you. I'm not going to share all of it, but here we go. Again, there's no sound. People would quietly, by darkness, go in small life rafts and get over to the ship. So it's not clear that you've got hundreds of people on land and the ship is not docked on land, but they take the life rafts over to the ship. Then they get on, again by cover of darkness, knowing that they're trying to get out of Europe and Hitler, hoping to get into Palestine, the land of Israel. And then the ship set sail. These are our people. Men, women, children, with the hope that they're going to get into Palestine. And you see how tightly packed they were. This was not a cruise. You could see how tightly packed they were. All desperate to get out, to get into Palestine. All the hope. And so what you had happening was the Patria arrives in the land of Israel at Haifa. In the end, 267 people died. At the time of the sinking, the Patria was carrying 1,800 Jews from Nazi-occupied Europe, and the British were deporting them from mandatory Palestine to Mauritius. Zionist organizations opposed the deportation, and the underground paramilitary Haganah planted a bomb intended to disable the ship to prevent it from leaving Haifa. Haganah claims it miscalculated, and the bomb blew the steel frame off. The ship sank in less than 16 minutes. When the bomb exploded, the Patria was carrying 1,770 refugees from those 3 ships I mentioned. Most were rescued by British and Arab boats that rushed to the scene, but 267 died, including over 200 refugees. Many of the dead were trapped in the Patria's hold and unable to escape as she rolled on her side and sank. 209 bodies eventually were recovered and buried in Haifa. One more ship that we'll talk about, the Exodus. In 1960, Stanley Kubrick made a movie starring Paul Newman. I think it was Stanley Kubrick. I have to double check. I'm sorry, Otto Preminger. Otto Preminger made a movie starring Paul Newman and Lisa Marie Saint called Exodus. And they took the name based on the ship, but they changed the story. It's a very happy movie, more or less. It's the story. It's a worthwhile movie, even more so now because a movie like that never would be made by today's Hollywood. In those days, Hollywood was pro-Israel. That's why they cast Paul Newman as the Jew trying to get in. Today, they would cast the guy who played Lurch in the Addams Family. And so what ended up happening is the way the movie works is that the Jews are trying to get out of a displaced persons camp in Cyprus, and they're able to intimidate the British through political sympathy, international sympathy, and a hunger strike. The British let them come into Palestine. That's not what actually happened. What actually happened is that this ship, the Exodus, is the single largest Jewish refugee ship during World War II. 4,500 Jews were on that ship, and the British did not allow the ship to come up. This was the Exodus. It was another Haganah ship. The British government opposed large-scale immigration, and displaced person camps run by American, French, and Italian officials often turned a blind eye to the situation. In 1945, the British government reaffirmed its 1939 White Paper, their policy that pretty much closed off all Jewish immigration to Palestine. They deployed naval and military forces to turn back refugees. More than half of the 142 voyages were stopped by British patrols. Most intercepted migrants were sent to Cyprus or to Mauritius. About 50,000 Jews ended up in these camps. More than 1,600 drowned at sea. Only a few thousand made it to Palestine. Of the 64 vessels that sailed, Exodus had 4,515, the largest ever. And her story became an international story. As she neared Palestinian territorial waters, the British Royal Navy sent 5 destroyers to stop her. At around 2 a.m., 2 hours after midnight, and there were only 20 nautical miles from Haifa, 2 Royal Navy destroyers came alongside the Exodus and jammed her between them. 50 Royal Marines armed with clubs and tear gas got on the ship to arrest the Jews and bring them back to displaced persons camps. Passengers and Haganah members resisted. The second officer, an American volunteer, Bill Bernstein, died from a skull fracture after being clubbed. 2 passengers died of gunshot wounds. That was the British shot them. Here you see British soldiers forcing the Jews onto their destroyer to take the Jews away from Palestine, away from Eretz Yisrael, to a displaced person camp. The British ships went from Marseille and ultimately dropped off the Jews in Germany. Britain realized that returning the refugees to camps in Germany would elicit a public outcry. But at that time, after World War II, Britain controlled the land of Germany. And they felt that, well, that's a place we can dump the Jews. Not going to bring them into England. Britain's position was summed up by John Coulson, a diplomat at the British Embassy in Paris, in a message to the Foreign Office in London. You will realize that an announcement of decision to send immigrants back to Germany will produce violent, hostile outbursts in the press. Our opponents in France, and I dare say in other countries, have made great play with the fact that these immigrants are being kept behind barbed wire in concentration camps and guarded by Germans. The government ultimately dumped these Jews in France. The officer in charge of the operation, Lieutenant Colonel Gregson, later gave a frank assessment and concluded, the Jew is liable to panic in 800 to 900 Jews fighting to get up a stairway to escape tear smoke could have produced a deplorable business. It's a very frightening thing to go into the full hold full of yelling maniacs when outnumbered 6 or 8 to 1. It should be borne in mind that the guiding factor in most of the actions of the Jews is to gain the sympathy of the world press. And so Jews were forced into displaced person camps in Germany and in places like that. Here you have Jewish refugees in the Poppendorf German camp. Now I showed you, and this is issue 1. There are 3 main issues with the British. Number 1, they would not allow Jewish survivors and refugees into Israel, causing, as Dr. Kedar points out, millions of lives. It sounds crazy. If you didn't know who Professor Mordechai Kedar is, it's like you'd say he's a madman. He's nuts. What's he talking about? What, the British are responsible for millions of Jews dying? But yeah, Jews were trying to get out and were allowed out onto ships, and the British wouldn't let them in. So they got turned back. In addition to the problem of the British not letting Jews in, Britain, over a period of 50 years, truncated the size of the land of Israel. The land of Israel, let's take a look at the maps, because it's, right, one picture, 1,000 words. I showed you earlier, to give you a feel of it, here's the Mississippi River. That is what the Jordan River is to the land of Israel. Modern day Israel, the map has the Jordan River to the east as the eastern boundary of Israel if you include Judea, Samaria, Yehudah, Shomron. Actually, the Jordan River is not even in the middle. The Jordan River is over here. Here you have like cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa. You have Yerushalayim, Hebron, Bethlehem. Here's the Jordan River. The so-called West Bank, what the Arabs call the West Bank, what we call Yehudah Shomron, Yehudah, Judea, Samaria, is the west of the Jordan River. Contemporary Israel, on today's map, if you give Israel the benefit of the doubt of Yehudah Shomron, what the Arabs call the West Bank, the occupied West Bank. So the modern day map of Israel shows Israel ending here. Actually, all this was Israel. Get a good picture of that, because that picture becomes the logo of the Irgun. Let me show it to you. I'll jump right down. I'll come right back. That's the logo of the Irgun. Land of Israel, the Jordan River in the middle, and all the rest of the British tore off. And the Irgun logo was that land of Israel, like this, and all of what today is called Jordan, with the hand of a rifle. This line here is the Jordan River. Again, their more formal logo, the land of Israel, all the rest, the rifle, the Jordan River, Etzel, Irgun Tzva'i Leumi, Irgun Tzva'i Leumi, national military organization, otherwise known in English as the Irgun, and their slogan was Rak Kach, only thus, only with a rifle are we ever going to get freedom. Let's see what happened with the land. So this was supposed to be the land. The French got Syria. The French got Lebanon. The British got Egypt. That's why Egyptians speak English, whereas Lebanese and Syrians speak French. In 1922, the British tore off all of the yellow from the land of Israel. So when people talk about all we want the Jews, all we're asking Israel for is a compromise. Just give them the West Bank, Judea Samaria. We just want a compromise for peace, a two-state solution. Here's your two-state solution. Only no one remembers it, but that was what the Jews were promised in 1922. You're supposed to have all of this, but we want to do a two-state solution. You'll have a Jewish country in purple and an Arab Palestine in yellow. And we're going to give it a new name. Since it's across the Jordan River, it's Transjordan. Initially, it was called Transjordan, and then for short, Jordan. So it has a city called Amman, now the capital of Jordan, and that's the Jordan River. That's the Sea of Galilee, or the Kinneret, the Jordan River, the Dead Sea, Yam HaMelach. And here's your two-state solution, literally. That's 1922. And then another solution, another two-state solution. Here's all that was left of Israel, the purple. 1947, 25 years later, the UN had a new partition plan, a two-state solution. What about all of Jordan? What about all of Jordan? We're talking about a two-state solution. The orange would be Israel. This is what Israel was given from this. This was Israel's mandatory Palestine. Here's the two-state solution. Jordan. Everybody forgets 25 years later what happened. And now the UN says we'll give Israel a country, and you'll have this little panhandle up north. You'll have Haifa, Tel Aviv. Where's Jerusalem? Oh, it's going to be internationalized. In the Arab state, two-state solution. The green is Arab state. Beersheba is going to be on the border. Arabs will get Hebron, Beit Lechem, Ramallah. That's your two-state solution. And you'll get the Negev, which is dry desert. The Arabs don't want it anyway. They have Bedouin down there. So that's Israel. Israel, if you've ever been to it, that's Israel. Haifa, Tel Aviv, that's all you're going to get. The Arabs would not even accept that. So they went to war when the state of Israel was declared. And when the war ended, Israel actually liberated this green area, Akko, Accra, Nozrat, Nazareth, up into Galilee. So this all became, in this map, all the green is the Israel that emerged after the war. So if the Arabs would have just accepted what the UN tried to superimpose, the Arabs would have had not only the so-called West Bank, and as you can ask yourself, here's the Jordan River. So how far out does a bank go of a river? It's practically at the Mediterranean Sea. Israel had only like 9 miles of width. It's a 9-minute drive. Have you ever driven to a local convenience store for 9 minutes? It's a 9-minute drive at 60 miles an hour. So if you're driving 40 miles an hour, 50 an hour, it's a 10-minute drive. It's a 12-minute drive. That's the whole country. The Arabs had all of this, but they wouldn't accept it. And so when the smoke cleared at the end of the war, this was Israel for 18 years. from 1949 until the 1967 war. Israel was able to, Beersheba no longer was on the border of the Arab country. Here's Judea and Samaria, what the Arabs call the West Bank. All right, to give you side by side, one more time. Here's the land of Israel. That's the mandate. That's the two-state solution. And that's the next two-state solution. That's the context when you understand why a Jewish underground arose. The idea of the Jewish underground was we have to drive the British out because the British are denying Jews the opportunity to come in, and they're truncating the country. There's nothing left. So 3 organizations developed, the Haganah, and it became a fighting arm. We won't take out a lot of time on it. The Palmach grew out of the Haganah. And then there was the Irgun. I showed you the map and the logo. And then there was the Lechi, Lochamei Cherut Yisrael. Each of them had a stirring song. I want to just share with you, here we are in America, and the music we hear is, I don't know, Taylor Swift. I don't know, Dr. J. There's music that's at the soul of the founding of Israel. This is the song of the Palmach. Right? I don't know if you picked up on that. Let me stop that a moment. Hold on. Look what's happened. Look what has happened in the political correctness. You can't even show a song of the Jewish underground without apologizing. This is not political. It's only for historical purposes. Terrible. This is not political. Next, this is the Irgun song. The meaning of the purpose of the song, another reason for the song, and we'll be finishing today's class with the Irgun song and the Lechi song, and we'll be continuing this subject next week. I think it's going to run 3 classes, 2 more, which will take us right into Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day. The purpose of these songs also, there's another reason, and then I'll play them. How did the underground get its message across to the public? Right? I'm running an underground to drive out the British. How did the public, I don't have like channel 2, channel 4, channel 14, channel 13. I can't do that. The British will come into the studio, they'll kill all of us. Well, they'll arrest us. So they had an underground radio station. They would run an underground radio station, and they had to change frequencies every day, because otherwise the British could check the frequencies and find them, where they're broadcasting from. So what they would do is they would play for about 5 minutes before broadcasting. They would play the hymn of the particular underground organization, and people would know, let's say at 8:00 p.m. at 2000 hours, the Irgun is going to be broadcasting, and you would just be shifting across on your radio station, trying to find till you hear that melody. And that would be the way you knew, okay, I found the Irgun station for tonight. Here's the Irgun and then the Lechi, and that'll be it for tonight. And finally, the theme song of the Lechi. want to thank you for being with us today. Now, next week, just a sneak preview just for a second, then we're going to close because we like to stick with our 1 hour estimated times. We'll be going next week, continuing, talking more deeply about the Irgun and the actions of the Irgun, the bombing of the King David Hotel, the British having wanted posters, dead or alive, trying all over Palestine, putting up these posters. The guy whose face is in a circle was the commander of the Irgun, who's wanted dead or alive, Menachem Begin. We'll be going through a tremendous amount of this, the story of Dov Gruner, and the hangings. The hangings of the 12 people. If you ever go into Accra, up north in Israel, there's the Akko fortress, and the British, this is where they hanged, the gallows where they hanged members of the Irgun and the Lechi. We'll be going through a lot of this next week and into the week after. I want to thank you very much. Purposes to start fleshing out for ourselves a better understanding of the history of the state of Israel, how it came into being. Nobody gave Israel a country on a platter. The image in the public is that the United Nations and Western colonialist imperialists gave Jews a country on a silver platter. Quite the opposite. A lot of people gave their lives in a lot of different ways in order to have it. And we don't appreciate it enough today. So at least those of us learning about it will have a better, deeper appreciation. Thanks so much for being here. God willing, see you next Sunday. And also during the week, we have our Tuesday night class in Navi and our Thursday night class in Mishnah. Be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.